Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Honestly, the fact that we pulled Ken away from the pool and we actually physically extracted Evan from the cottage, you're here in person, and that to me, I would have put a lot of money down on the negative bet there. So I don't know what kind of luck from this season that we're wasting on this offseason episode to get everyone in person and getting the Ken spot done in the middle of summer, but this might be borrowing future success for ourselves.
If the Red Wings miss the playoffs by 1 point, you can pencil this date in. August 4th. That will be the date.
Why would you do that, man?
I don't know.
You know your predictive powers.
I know. Nothing has come to me yet for this season. We'll find out soon enough.
And to be fair, you can't prove Ken wasn't next to the pool, and Evan is definitely still mentally at the cottage.
Oh, I'm mentally definitely at the cottage.
Ken has absolutely recorded next to the pool before.
Yes. We know he has.
We'll take what we can get. This feels like the absolute middle of the off season. So thank goodness we have Ken on this episode. Folks, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Even though it is the middle of the offseason, even though it's August 4th, we are here with you for another episode to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to bring an interview to you, checking in with Ken Daniels, lead announcer of the Detroit Red Wings. Our first time having him on the show since everything happened in free agency and the NHL draft. So just checking in with him to see his take on everything from the Kane re-signing to Tarasenko coming in to, what Seider and Edvinsson have in front of them, and can Lucas Raymond take another step, and thoughts on where Detroit is at heading into next season based on what Steve Yzerman has done so far, all that and more. We are then going to talk to you about a conversation that we've been touching on, but we're going to dive into a little bit more, which is Simon Edvinsson and what we can reasonably expect of him in this upcoming season. Who is he as a player? What has he done already? And what leaps and bounds might he take this year if Detroit is to be successful? We're going to be talking to you about Moritz Seider Lucas Raymond, their deals that haven't happened yet, and how other contracts across the league might be factoring into those conversations. And then we have some NHL news, including the Marty Necas deal and more before we jump into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that the Winged Wheel Podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to benefits like our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. We let loose, have fun, answer any questions that didn't make the main show, tell stories. You get some bloopers in there. It's a good time. You also get our bonus off-season episodes, which come in around midweek during the off-season. So even though we're down to one a week for our main show, patrons still get bonus content midweek. And those are, more evergreen conversations. Last week, we posted the previous fall Winged Wheel Podcast night at the LCA featuring Ken Daniels and Chris Osgood. And that was an excellent, excellent time with Chris Osgood, his first time on the show. And we were really happy we were able to salvage that audio because Chris's stories were just fantastic. So patrons will have probably already listened to that. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, and you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways as well. We give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So lots of stuff for our patrons who help us do everything on the show. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Let's jump right in with what I think will be folks' favorite part of the episode, which is hearing from Ken Daniels, he is so gracious with his time to do this in the middle of the summer. This is his time to recharge, reset. For all we say about the grind of the season, goodness knows how hard that is for Ken and Mick. So they deserve the break. So big thank you to our good friend Ken Daniels for jumping on, and it's a great conversation with him. So without further ado, our check-in with Ken Daniels, lead announcer at the Detroit Red Wings and Bally Sports Detroit. Enjoy. Ken, I owe you one because I think I dragged you away from the pool. So this is mighty rude of a friend to do, but I appreciate you joining us on a nice summer weekend. How has your summer been so far?
Well, except for today. No, I'm just kidding. Great. It's good.
Good.
Hitting the ball well, and been down to Little Caesars a little bit. And it's been nice. You think about it, and it probably, all of a sudden you turn around now and it's August and you go, wow, but it's nice. Still got a lot of time.
Yeah, the fact that it's August, you're no longer thinking that the season's a few months away. And this is actually, I think, our first time connecting since after, the mayhem of the draft and free agency to have you on the show. So I figure if we waited any longer, we'd be into next season completely. So now's a good time to get your opinion on things, especially while you're feeling good and you're hitting the ball well. That makes one of us. I think me and Evan are both struggling
we'll see.
off the tee right now.
When you guys come out here, we'll see how well I do.
Yeah. I have a lesson booked for right beforehand, so I'll be as primed as I possibly can be.
If the teacher's good.
That's right. It's not Evan, I'll tell you that. So
good.
You've been getting some sun, you've been relaxing, but actually, you were kind of part of the Red Wings news, even though this is your summer vacation. The big return of Patrick Kane, which was somewhat of a surprise depending on how you read his intentions going into the offseason. That was great for Hockeytown and Red Wings fans, but your name came up in the conversation, which was really cool. Kane in media interviews talked about how your goal calls and how special those moments are, and going back to watch them himself, like that made him feel like he was part of the, this massive, incredible fan base and organization. And that's part of what gave him the atmosphere and the kind of feeling around the team that pulled him back. How special was that for you to hear as a broadcaster?
It was very special. Yeah, I loved it. It was very nice. I texted him afterwards, and on cleanout day, when I really wasn't sure whether he was coming back, because perhaps there was longer term, maybe it wasn't there elsewhere, I'm not sure. But I didn't think the term would be in Detroit, but I think the contract works great for both sides in the end. But when we said goodbye, even on cleanout day, he had said similar thoughts to me that day. And, I was very touched that day, and still I wasn't sure he was coming back. In a way, when he said that to me on cleanout day, I thought this was his goodbye to me, and I was sort of sad about that, thinking, maybe he's going to get termed somewhere else. But as it turns out, I was very happy with what he said, humbled, and I was really just happier that he was coming back, and we get to watch him for another season, and healthier, and training where he needs to be in Chicago and Toronto, and he gets to work on his hip that he really couldn't work on a year ago because he wasn't really certain how it would be a react. And now he knows how he reacted, and now he knows what needs work. So I believe you can be a year older, but I think you can be even better than he was a year younger.
And to that point of being better, Kane was pretty much one of his only believers, and he proved everyone wrong when he did what he did with Detroit. So you think there's more to his game than what we saw last season? You think he can find another gear from when he was healthier pre, surgery?
I do. Oh, for sure. And to start from where he started, what was it, December or so?
Just about, yeah.
Against San Jose, around there. So sure, with how you train, and he had told me during the season that when he was feeling great, and he said, considering how I had to train, because you weren't really sure how far you could push something, what might be a setback. And now when you go through the grind of an NHL schedule, and you know what you did a year ago just to be ready, and now you know what you can work on to improve upon. So yeah, I think he can be better. A lot of it comes down to, and I think JT Compher's season was fine. Is he necessarily a unique setup guy to be a second line center if Kane's not playing with Larkin? That's the question. And then there's power play time, and see how Tarasenko does, and hopefully get more out of DeBrincat. But I think and you lose Perron in that vein. So how's it all work with Kane? So a lot of questions still to be had, but I think a whole season he improved point wise where he was last year for sure.
I remember when we watched a game together, and it was David Perron on the bench. This was a couple seasons ago, and he was quite vocal and quite active, and that became well known through Red Wings fandom that Perron was not just a leader on the ice, but especially in the room and being vocal with the guys. And the Red Wings lost Perron, and they added Tarasenko, and a lot of people would take that trade maybe in terms of offense. But how do you see that balance of who's coming in offensively and who's going out in terms of leadership in the room?
Well, leadership in the room, and I spoke to Derek Lalonde about that. We had a colleague session down at Little Caesars, and the colleagues were there, and I had the opportunity to speak with Derek in front of the colleagues and Chris Illich and all the gang. And he had said the leadership, there are other guys who can step up. And I see a guy like Lucas Raymond even getting more and more confidence, perhaps taking another step, in Dylan Larkin to continue to do what he does. And, one person's absence just gives another voice who may have been just on the edge of speaking up before, but deferred to David. And maybe that's not that Patrick Kane's a loud guy in the room. He's not. But maybe it gives somebody else the opportunity, because certainly David Perron was vocal, and even Newsy had broached that subject, how it will be quieter on the bench and in the room, but in a different way. And that doesn't mean other folks aren't stepping up and lending their voice. So I think they'll do that. Offensively, even with the trade-off of Tarasenko, can he score 20? You certainly hope he can, but remains to be seen, and the time that he's going to get. And Berggren, if he's with the Red Wings to start the year, how much time does he get in the top 9 role, if not on the fourth line? So many things come into play. But I think even with the goals added and over an 82 game season and those lost, I think the Red Wings are still down about 15% in goals. But to what Steve Yzerman said postseason in his media address, and Newsy has also said they want to be better defensively. So Talbot will help that somewhat. So if you can cut down a few goals against, maybe that lops off some of the 15% in goals for that you're still down.
You talked about Raymond getting more confidence. We won't talk contracts because, if anyone knew, it'd be the most valuable news in the world, and Steve Yzerman would probably find you. But in terms of Raymond and Seider, what more is there? Because, Yzerman has said this, Derek Lalonde has said this. These guys are looking to improve, in that kind of internal team improvement maybe will account for some of the better play on the ice. How much more is there in terms of Raymond's progression, especially from what we saw at the end of the last season, and hopefully in terms of, providing some more comfortable minutes for Mo Seider so he's not so burdened?
Yeah, that'll be a big challenge. I still, for me, think earlier than later. I just see Edvinsson with Seider. I just do. And I don't know when that's going to happen. It would shock me if it came earlier in the season. It depends on the preseason, Edvinsson showed last year he can play. There's no doubt about that. Can he play those minutes and bigger body and more space? And I don't know how they're going to do that defensively, and they got a logjam back there, so that's something to figure out on the back end. So, you're right, we don't know, and a lot of that's going to play into how Seider and Raymond and the contracts and how that goes in negotiations too. Can Raymond be a 30-goal scorer? I think so. I think he's showing that. And can it be a point per game guy? Yeah. I think he had 70, 71 last season. Can he be a point per game guy? Yeah. And again, it's how the lines shake out. So, Larkin's the driver down the middle. The Red Wings don't really have that elsewhere as a guy who can do that. Comper's very reliable, but Cop more in a third line role. That's just what it is, or on the wing. So what do? Does Danielson halfway through the season, you get an injury? And Danielson showed well in the preseason last year. So again, so much of that comes into play that I hate making predictions like that. But can Raymond be a 30-goal scorer and a point per game guy? Yeah. And if he has a similar season this year than he did last year, I don't think that's a failure by any stretch. I think that's pretty darn good.
And you mentioned, there's a lot of questions offensively, where are those going to come from? Defensively, how are they going to figure out the log jam? We're going to talk about it on today's episode, but Edvinsson, as unfair as it might be to him, he's going to drive a lot of how much better can this defense be than last season, if at all. So on balance, Steve Yzerman said in his presser, he feels pretty much the same about this team going into next season. Do you have the same kind of vibe around this potential lineup in terms of their playoff chances?
Yeah, they hope to be competitive in the mix, just like we said last year that they would be, and they were. So again, it's the step that I think New Jersey will be a lot better team than they were, and they missed the playoffs. If Charlie Lindgren is real for Washington, and Washington improved a bit, I think, in the offseason, so can Washington be as good? Not convinced about that. So can the Red Wings be in there with them? For sure. I believe New Jersey will take another step, though, and then you got Buffalo and Ottawa, and we've talked about those teams for years and what they haven't been able to do. So are they finally able to take the step? So I think, Ryan, I said it with you guys at the start of last year, it's not so much what the Red Wings do, it's also what other teams do in their division, where 91 points in that the empty net goal made the playoffs last year. I thought it would be 96 or 97, and it wasn't. Came to 91. Can it be that again, or does it go back up to 96 or 97? So are the Red Wings another 7 points better to be in that mix, or are they right around the same part they were last year, or improve that much defensively? I believe they have to be that much better defensively to be in the same spot that they were last year, don't you?
I think so, and I think goaltending is going to drive a lot.
Yeah,
you
big
said
part of that.
topic.
Sure.
Yeah, because how many games especially down the stretch where they were in that funk and they were trying to get out of it. And maybe they played a halfway decent game, but they just Lyon was gassed and you couldn't rely on Reimer and Husso was hurt. Like if you can get just, a handful more solid games from the goalies, I think that'll make difference in the standings.
It will. And so much is going to depend on, the three goalies. That they, it turned out to be a luxury last season as it was, but you also don't have the same luxury in that you have Johansson and Berggren who are out of waiver, eligibility that way. So they're with the team. So how do you squeeze in three goalies there? And where does that slot in? And you got a lot of defensemen now. So there's going to be a competition for jobs. They love the competition for jobs. I think the young kids, Mazur and Danielson and others, they're going to want Casper. They're going to want to succeed in Grand Rapids. I believe as an organization, just me, I haven't asked them, but I would think they'd want them to dominate. When you've got enough to play here, you've got the contracts, you've got the players. I mean, you moved out of Fabre and Wallman goes, Gustafsson comes in. Okay. Gostisbehere gone. So, but you're still filled holes. So I believe if the kids can dominate in Grand Rapids and if injuries happen, get called up. But if you think they're all going to make the team out of camp, it's just the numbers aren't there. It's not going to happen. So we have to see how it plays out.
Ken, we have a lot planned for this upcoming season, but I need your wife to not hate me. So I'm going to let you go back to the pool. I'm going to very quickly tell people we have a lot of exciting stuff planned. Ken and the Jamie Daniels Foundation are a big part of that. So if you want a little sneak preview of what we've been doing for the Jamie Daniels Foundation and how you might be able to help out, go to wingedwheelpodcast.com/wingsmotb to find out more about Wings Money on the Board, raising money for the Jamie Daniels Foundation, and through Winged Wheel podcast nights at the LCA and some other things that we have in the works with Ken. I think this is going to be a record-setting year in terms of our support. So Ken, I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show and looking forward to a fun year together.
Only you, because of all you do, and for us, and you guys are so wonderful, can drag me away from that and the friends. But I got tired of listening to them for a minute anyway, so it's okay. Good break. It's good. Thanks.
Make sure they don't listen to the show.
They get tired of listening to me too. That's okay. Yeah, I'll have a bot listen to this. Exactly. All right. Thanks, pal. We'll speak to you soon.
Welcome back. That was our conversation with Ken Daniels. Evan, he was sad that you were not there, but as he mentioned, we are going to see where everyone's respective games are at in our upcoming golf rounds. So I'm in a
dark place right now, I'll tell you that much.
Me and you both, brother. Ken's going to dial us at his home course. That's going to be tough.
Yeah, we're in trouble.
Bring the change. We might be buying a lot of drinks. Okay, let's jump into our conversation, which we teased earlier. Simon Edvinsson. He is a Detroit Red Wing. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Even though last season he probably spent more time in Grand Rapids than he realistically should have based on his talent compared to what Detroit had with the Red Wings, he is now a Detroit Red Wing. He's played his games, and he's going to be a big fixture on this blue line, no pun intended, not because of how talented he is, but also because they need him to be. There was turnover on this blue line, but not to the degree where they took massive leaps and bounds from the guys they brought in. It's more going to be the internal improvement of, Edvinsson's steps forward, as well as him playing more games and thus being better for the team. So to lay the foundation for the conversation, who is Simon Edvinsson as a player and what have we seen already now compared to when he was drafted?
Well, Edvinsson's a bit of a unicorn, and anybody who follows the Red Wings, that's not news to them. He's gigantic, roughly 8'2", really good skater, 5-way mobility. I've heard it referred to as, he's good on his pivots, his transitions, forwards, backwards, really, really smooth skater, silky hands, which is kind of the part of it that makes him the unicorn. Is a guy that size should not be able to stick handle and control a puck like he does. And because of that, he is very poised with the puck, doesn't rush plays, isn't afraid to take his time with the puck and, make a move if he has to delay an extra 3 seconds for something to open up. Not as much offense as we had hoped once he got to the pros, but I'd say probably slightly better defending than we thought we'd get once he jumped to the pros. So you have this giant defenseman who can skate, handle a puck, lead a breakout, is capable in the offensive zone is probably the way I'd phrase it right now. because I think there's more to his offensive game. We just haven't seen it a ton yet. He's definitely holding back, I'll say. You don't see him activating a ton, at least as much as you did when he was in Europe still. So I think he's got a really, really good foundation to be a good 2-3D in the NHL. And depending, honestly, whatever he puts his focus on is kind of going to determine his role over the next couple of years. Or I should say where the coaches make him put his focus.
I like what you said about he's holding back. And we saw that in ways with Mo Seider and have heard that really. Like the coaches have said, yeah, we asked him to focus a lot more on this end of the ice based on what the team's needs are. Or earlier on in his game, they wanted him to focus more on, this aspect of getting back and maybe not committing to a big hit down the ice. And Simon Edvinsson is probably seeing a lot of the same thing. I think as well, there's more to his offensive game, and it is by design by the Red Wings. And I think a lot of teams and coaches do this too. When you have a player with the tools and you know those tools are there and you know what they can do, there's no point in asking them to come in and be the number 2 defenseman on the team right away. Come in and focus on the fundamentals. The fundamentals matter whether you're a 13th forward or a top pairing defenseman. Everyone needs to do that all the same because the NHL is just a completely different beast. It's not the same as playing in the SHL. It's not the same as playing in the AHL. And those are 2 of the best leagues in the world. So yeah, I think there's more to Simon Edvinsson's offensive game than what we've seen. And I agree that I've been pleasantly surprised by, how well-rounded his game is, how much he's already improved in terms of, making decisions with pace and minimizing, hanging on for that half beat too long, which was a little bit of a concern when he was drafted, or at least part of what made him a little bit project-y, if you're going to use a weird adjective. What I've seen from Simon Edvinsson so far at the Grand Rapids level and at the Red Wings level is extremely promising to me, where I'm in the camp of, I think he's going to be Detroit's number 2 defenseman by the end of the season. And the only reason he won't be on Mo Seider's pair is because they might want to spread out the talent. And that's equal parts Simon Edvinsson has all the ability to do that, and equal parts the Red Wings blue line doesn't have a lot to say for it, so he doesn't have a lot of challengers above him.
Where does Simon Edvinsson start on the depth chart day 1 of the season?
2.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, like in terms of, you factor in all the talent, he's their second best defenseman. In terms of what you might get on ice product, game 1 of the season, maybe Ben Chiarot if he's clicking with Mo Seider in the preseason. But yeah, he's their second best defenseman. He's their second most important defenseman. It's not close.
And let's not forget the fact that he's developed the ability to get involved in the extracurriculars, like we saw at Flying Toaster Night when he had an official fight.
Oh, man.
Against the smallest player that I've ever seen play in the AHL, but a fight nonetheless.
Look, I know it's been rocky between Jonatan Berggren and the Red Wings, but you need him up in the NHL at the same time as Edvinsson, if not for the fact that those 2 are just absolute dudes. Like, talking to Simon Edvinsson after that fight was hilarious because he had a bloody nose, like the bridge of his nose was bleeding, and he was grinning ear to ear talking to us about the fight, but you couldn't even really get an answer out of him because he was laughing, because in the background, Berggren was chanting, Rocky, Rocky, Rocky.
Oh my God.
But yeah, Edvinsson's like, the time in Grand Rapids, as much as I complained a lot, I'll own that, about him not being in Detroit, it was beneficial for him. And was it the best for the Red Wings? No, but was it beneficial for him still? And was it a really great runway and a safe runway? Absolutely.
Ish. You could split hairs about the month that he should have come up.
No,
but
I'm not disagreeing. Was it optimal? I fully am still under the train of he should have come up sooner. But
he did develop a lot in a lot of beneficial ways this past season in Grand Rapids. Yes. Was it the optimal timeline?
No.
Probably not.
I'd say 0% it was optimal. Like he should have been up sooner.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's just part of, the Red Wings had too many guys. We have too many dudes, and the injuries just didn't come. Like, there was all of the depth guys who were there. No one got hurt. The roster movement wasn't there. I don't think it was like, impossible to get him up. But again, we're not going to relitigate that. We've talked about that till Kingdom Come. We say Edvinsson is going to end up at the second best defenseman on this team if he's not already. what does he need to focus on now for this season, just to start the season? Like, what are you looking for from him to start to take steps in that progression? Because a big aspect of this as well is he might not have an optimal right D partner. Like, he clicked with Jeff Petry last season. It actually wasn't too bad at the end of the season. But is that going to hold? Is it going to be Gustafsson on his right side? It might not be an ideal setup.
I love Newsy, and I think he's a genuinely good coach, but he is very much a victim of the coaching fraternities, stereotypes and stuff, certain things they stick to. One of them is you're not putting a rookie defenseman with an all-offense defenseman, which is what Erik Gustafsson is. When you run through the possibilities of who Edvinsson's going to play with, it's almost Petry by elimination, because I don't see them breaking any of the other molds. You're not putting Maatta on his off wing. You're not putting him with an all-offensive guy. You're not starting him on the top pair with Seider. So you cross off the possibilities of what any coach would do, and it basically leaves you with Petry. So understanding that context in the backs of everybody's mind for this conversation, I don't want to focus on the defense, but he is absolutely going to have to focus on the defense, because even though Petry wasn't as bad as the memes would have you to believe, he wasn't good, especially in his own end. And if Edvinsson's with anybody but Seider, he's going to be doing the heavy lifting in the D zone. That's just the reality of this D group as it is right now. With his frame and his skating, he does a really good job of shutting down time and space for the opponents. He can do it with an active stick. He can do it with his physicality. And again, if he finds himself out of position, his skating allows him to make up for mistakes quicker than other players. That being said, there are things he needs to work on. You know, we've talked for years and years about his pace. It got better last year, but it's still not where it will need to be at the NHL level. And this is a fine balance for Simon. And this is, if I had to zero in on one thing that I'm most curious about to watch this year, is the pace with him. Because on the one hand, being calm, cool, and collected with the puck and taking your time and being confident in what you're doing is a great thing. But in the NHL level, there is a limit to that. If you are too calm, too slow to make a decision, too delayed in making a play, it can burn you in big ways. We didn't see it a ton last year, but we did see it. So I'm curious to see if there's going to be a note to him from coaching staff to, we like that, but you have to be careful with it. Don't take unnecessary risks. And I think from the offensive zone, I would like to see them activate more. And I think they probably want him to work on his shot, because for a guy that size, he does not have a great point shot. It's kind of a trade-off though, because you know, I've read reports and you can kind of see it watching him. He uses a really short stick for someone his size. Not a huge defensive concern because his wingspan is already so big. You're not worried about that.
2 Brad Crisco's long.
Exactly. But when you're shooting, a shorter stick is not optimal. It's better for puck handling though. So what's the trade-off there? Where would you rather have his strengths lie? But even if you don't have a great point shot, you can have a smart point shot. I always remember, who was it? Cholowski, when he was coming up, was really good for that. It was one of the few skills he had that really translated to the NHL. Was he always just found the lane at the right time, and there were a lot of deflection goals and just chaos created off his point shots in a smart way. So if Edvinsson can learn to do that a little more effectively, I think he could be dangerous in the offensive zone without even activating as much as I would like him to, spoken like a true forward. But yeah, he's going to have a lot of tweaks to make still, but I think foundationally he doesn't have anything he really needs to overhaul. Just keep getting better at the NHL level.
You mentioned, focusing on the potential errors of hanging on to the puck too long. I think back to Mo Seider in his first season. Seider ramped up pretty quickly. It was like 10, 12 games, and we were like, oh, yeah, this guy's already the best player on the team on the blue line. But he had his turnovers. He had his mistakes, and it was kind of, the very avoidable mistakes, I think, laterally across a blue line, for example, when they held the zoner and he was on the power play. And they persisted, and they got fewer and further between, and eventually, I don't want to say they were completely eliminated from his game. No player is completely mistake-free on defense with that kind of role at that age. But Seider now, compared to what people think is the more electric start to his career in his first season, is way more responsible of a player. So that kind of development, I see a lot of analogs between Seider and Edvinsson's potential development. And where I want to stop short is saying, don't expect what we saw from Seider on Edvinsson. I think Edvinsson is one of the few prospects in the league who could potentially do what Seider did, but it was almost such an anomaly what Seider did and has done in his first 3 seasons that you can't reasonably hold that kind of path to any prospect coming up, which is kind of my summary statement on this whole thing, which is Edvinsson can be the boon to this blue line that changes Detroit's, projections on the season and really lifts the whole blue line by adding another top end talent. And he could change the game and even be a difference maker in terms of us saying we don't make the playoffs if not for Simon Edvinsson, but it's not fair to hold him to that. And it's a big, big ask, and I don't even want to call it likely.
I think that's a huge point that you made, because when you factor what you just said in with the Seider comparisons to coming in, they're in 2 very different spots, and I don't mean developmentally. The Red Wings were hot trash, one of the worst teams in the NHL when Seider came in. He had a lot of latitude to screw up because it didn't matter that much. That was still one of those seasons where whatever happens with Seider and Raymond is way more important than whatever happened with the rest of the team, the standings, etc. So he does throw that dumb pass across the blue line in Toronto that leads to a breakaway. What does it matter in the grand scheme of things? Almost nothing. Edvinsson doesn't have that latitude this year because the expectations are to try and make a playoff run, which means I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because he gets the benefit of playing meaningful games from day one, which there's positives to that. But then there's less opportunity for mistakes. So if he does make those Seider-like early career mistakes, he might not be playing in the top 4 for too long. Again, love Newsy, but he doesn't stray away from traditional coaching moves, which means if you have a rookie defenseman making rookie mistakes when you're trying to make a playoff spot, you're not playing him 17, 18, 19, 20 minutes a game. So it will be curious to see. Now, I'm in the camp that Edvinsson's development is more important than whether or not the Red Wings make the playoffs this year. Because again, big picture, I prefer Stanley Cups versus 8th overall seeds, but that's a whole bigger conversation we've already had. So it will be interesting to see how much clearance he's given when those inevitable mistakes pop up.
See, where I differ is I think he is going to get more clearance. You're right in what you're saying, and that kind of thinking is very typical of NHL coaches, and we've seen that kind of thinking from Newsy and most coaches in the NHL. But who's ahead of Edvinsson on this depth chart that's going to hold him back from playing top 4 minutes? Like, even if he makes those mistakes, I think 2 things here. I think the coaching staff has shown more latitude. Yeah, it's been in less important times where you've been able to make mistakes and not completely burn yourself, but they've shown more latitude than I think what you're giving them credit for. And secondly, who's going to hold them back from playing those top 4 minutes? They can be so angry at, Edvinsson making 2 boneheaded mistakes over the course of 3 games that cost them goals. And, that little stretch, everyone gets in the doghouse at some point. No player's immune. But who's going to play ahead of them?
Don't you disrespect Ole Maatta?
But and then you can do that for a little bit, right? You can get away with that for a little bit. You talked about Jeff Petry not being as bad as the memes. At points he was, but that's when they were trying to get away with Jeff Petry, the second pair right D. Now the kicker to what I'm saying right now is that he might be Edvinsson's second pair right D partner. And that's the big hole in this lineup that Steve Yzerman kind of tried to fill, and they hope Gustafsson could be that. And I want to get to Gustafsson in a second, but I think I'm maybe a lot bit more optimistic than you in terms of what they might deploy Edvinsson as in this lineup and what he might be able to do and get away with. I don't think you're wrong in that's like the archetype of how they kind of bring a rookie defenseman in, talented though he might be. But this is kind of a unique situation. Yes, Detroit wants to make a playoff push, but Detroit has shown that they're willing to play talented rookies, especially when there's no one else to do it.
I'm not saying that's how it's going to go. My actual prediction on how this is going to play out is the context of what I'm saying with the playoffs and being in a better spot organizationally is I don't think Edvinsson's going to push as much as Seider did. I think there will be very specific instruction to not take those chances unless you are 110% sure.
Yeah, that's very fair. Like, that's the most likely outcome. I can't sit here and say it's not fair to put those expectations on Edvinsson and not agree with that point. What Seider did was special. What Raymond did was special. You're very lucky to have that happen to you once, let alone twice in a row like that. To have it 3 times, like, I mean, the Red Wings would be incredibly blessed. And that's also a testament to their drafting and development team as well.
Well, they've been holding and developing him in the minors for, 2-3 seasons now? I would say, if I was a betting man, I would say, the Red Wings' success partially will hinge on the success of Simon Edvinsson this season.
Yeah, I agree. It's not fair, and I keep saying that. It's not right.
He's a top 10 pick. It doesn't, it doesn't really matter if it's fair. Like, those are the expectations bestowed upon you as a top 10 pick.
You know how I can tell time is a flat circle and they've let him develop for way too long? I'm struggling in my head right now to remember if he was drafted in person or if that was still one of the COVID online drafts.
I think it was COVID.
That was 2021.
Yeah, I know it was 2021, but I can't remember if it was in person or online. I feel like it was still online.
I think that they did.
We were
that
online.
One
I remember it. Yeah,
they did an online one. Wait, were we? I think we were in studio.
No, we weren't. I remember being at our old place.
Oh my God. Wow, time is a flat circle.
Yeah.
COVID just it muddled so many years together. I can't even begin to capture that. If it happened in COVID, it could have happened 6 years ago or it could have happened last week.
6 weeks ago, yeah.
I, of all people, have the most accurate timeline to remember how long COVID was, and it still doesn't feel right because November 2019, when COVID came into existence, is the exact month Hank was born. And I got this little kid going into his second year of school in hockey. Like, oh my God.
The real patient zero.
Now, here's something that might make things more fair for Simon Edvinsson, and I use that word in jest, but what might give him a boost? Jeff Petry is your second pair right D. It doesn't matter if it's as Edvinsson's partner or not. That's not his ideal deployment. You want to use him as a third pair or you want to use him as your seventh D-man. That's where he was at his most useful for the Red Wings. If Erik Gustafsson can be that perfect balance, and he doesn't have to be exceptional, but just sufficient in replacing some of Gustafsson's offense, you can't expect all of it, but some, but be better defensively than Gustafsson, which is the bet that they have with Gustafsson right now, that could be just enough of a lift to give Edvinsson the platform that they need. Now, it might mean asking Gustafsson to play a little bit of a different game than what he's used to, but I think that'd be worthwhile for the sake of stabilizing a second pair with Edvinsson on it.
The two best things that might happen to Edvinsson this year, one, a trade for another right-shooting defenseman, or B, they just put him up with Seider and play them for 37 minutes a game.
I think that's what we're going to end up with. The hole on right D is immaterial, whether you're looking at Edvinsson or Seider, whoever. You need to add another one, right? Like to be an above average or at least average blue line. Sandin Pellikka, hopefully in the future, but you can't bank on that happening now or even next season, really. You want to add to that because Johansson is going to want to play minutes and you're going to want to, that's the same thing, just to a smaller scale. You're going to want to give him stability as well.
What are your thoughts on Justin Holl?
Brad, geez.
Hey, you said right-handed shooting defenseman. We have one of those.
It's, you know what? That if the Red Wings need a miracle comeback of a player, that'd be a great time to do it. Just be a rock solid 5'6" guy. Hell yeah, why not?
If Justin Holl can turn into what the Red Wings thought he was, he'd be an ideal partner for Simon Edvinsson.
It happened to some degree with Ben Chiarot, so, never say never.
Just don't hold your breath.
I don't want to get into predictions for Simon Edvinsson in terms of points or whatever, but
32.
Okay.
No, that's not an actual prediction.
Okay.
Norris candidate.
Oh, okay. Because they're not eligible for the Calder, which is, BS, just barely. But yeah, so we have to give him the Norris.
They actually rewrite the Calder rules too, so he's included because the season is so phenomenal.
My prediction is a big argument in April about how BS the eligibility rules are. Otherwise, he would win it in a landslide.
Yeah, that's going to be our talking points.
Yeah.
Huh? I'm all for that. I love a reason to complain. Actually, I think all three of us.
And at the NHL's expense, sign me up.
It's the first thing that we're going to do. Simon Edvinsson, again, I've made my feelings known. I think he's going to end up being on the top pair, and the only reason he wouldn't be is because they want to spread out the talent, which might make a lot of sense. I'm not saying I'm guaranteed to be right, but I think all the tools are there. If Simon Edvinsson doesn't, hit the ground running or doesn't have a phenomenal 82-game season and just really has a more average growth pattern in the NHL in terms of how his impact on the ice shows up, then the Red Wings blue line is, I hate to be a doomer here, but then they're really in trouble in terms of what you can expect from that blue line.
If Edvinsson can't be at least slightly above NHL average, this team is not sniffing a playoff spot. And I'm aware of how immensely unfair that is to him.
Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't mean that he is, cooked as a prospect forever. It just means that for this season, a lot of what they are hoping for it becomes a really far cry from reality.
Oh, it doesn't mean he's cooked as a prospect at all. If he's not above league average, congratulations. He's normal for a high-end defenseman going into his rookie year.
Yeah. Barring the fact that he's 6'6" or whatever he is.
Yeah.
Evan, you're the one who predicted the Edvinsson draft.
That is true.
So your predictions and expectations for him this season.
You know what? He's got a lot of the traits that Seider had coming into his rookie season. He's got that confidence. He's not afraid to look at the best players in the league and say, why not me? I think he's going to have a great season. They have to put him in a position for success, and they can't let a few bad moments or a few bad games or a stretch of games hinder the long-term growth of Simon Edvinsson, because he's going to be a big key this season, I think.
All right. That's Simon Edvinsson. Hopefully we get to talk to him again this season after another fight and a successful season with the Red Wings, or at least a start to one. So that's going to be a conversation ongoing. We'll see how camp maybe changes or influences perspectives. Okay, we are going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back after to continue this conversation. But first, let's hear from the wonderful sponsors of this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip pickup hockey day or therapy day. When you're dealing with a busy work schedule, a million activities for the kids, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even though we know what we need to do what's best for ourselves, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Therapy can help you build self-confidence, manage stress effectively, and develop healthier habits. It's not just for people who have been through major trauma either. It's for anyone looking to better themselves and their mental health. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's completely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/wingedwheel today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/wingedwheel. We love a great deal as much as the next podcast, but we're not going to take a bunch of slap shots to the shins just to save a few bucks. It has to be easy. No hoops, no BS. So when Mint Mobile told us it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan, we called them on it. We gave a longtime Winged Wheel podcast listener a chance to try Mint Mobile, and the first things they told us were that activation and setup were super easy, and how simple, effective, and user-friendly the Mint Mobile site is. To get started, go to mintmobile.com/wingedwheel. There, you'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number, along with all your existing contacts. Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/wingedwheel. That's mintmobile.com/wingedwheel. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/wingedwheel. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. Other news across the NHL. First off, an update. Moritz Seider Lucas Raymond still unsigned. And that's as expected. We talked recently. What drives those contracts? Deadlines. Have there been any deadlines in the end of July, early August? No. Camp might change things. It could go into camp, could go into preseason. but that's when you really start to feel the squeeze. I'll tell you, it has been a, pretty tight information process. And that means there's not even chatter about the chatter. You hear a lot of noise and not everything gets reported because you have to be able to confirm and corroborate and all that. But you generally hear chatter by this point in a contract negotiation. And this is it's reflective of how important this is for the Red Wings. No one's screwing around on this one. So I though people want information, I think that's a good sign. But beyond that, what do we know? The team's priority is long-term at the right price. You can discern that the player's priority is to get the maximum value. Both players are confident that they'll be Red Wings, so there's not really a concern of if they'll sign. Something that's happened since, not necessarily those contracts, but another one is Brock Faber was extended to a max 8-year, $68 million deal, $8.5 million AAV that begins in 2025-2026. That extension with the Minnesota Wild after a really good season for Brock Faber, where if Connor Bedard didn't exist, he probably would have been a Calder favorite. How does that move the needle, if at all, for Mo Seider on defense?
Well, how that affects Seider is tough to say because this is a weird contract. Faber, I'm going to come off sounding pretty negative about this, and I really don't want to because I really do like Brock Faber. Phenomenal value already for a 45th overall pick or whatever it was. Just don't look at where Minnesota got that pick or LA got that pick when they took him before they traded him to Minnesota.
Stop.
Why does it always happen? Anyways.
You can't actually draw those lines, but it is annoying that it always happens that way.
I know. He had a really good year playing huge minutes and was arguably Minnesota's number one defenseman this year. Got all the toughest matchups, played the Mo Seider role essentially with Jacob Middleton for most of the years. The underlying numbers weren't great. They weren't bad, but they weren't great. So similar to Mo Seider. But with Mo Seider, you have 3 years. With Brock Faber, you have 1 year. And I feel like every year there's a rookie or a breakout player where the narrative gets way ahead of the actual performance. Because there were legit people who voted him for the Calder Trophy over Connor Bedard, which is, I can't stress this enough, insane. Like, I get minutes played and all that's but if you're not giving Mo Seider Norris votes, you're not giving Brock Faber Calder votes, like that type of vibe. You know what I mean? And he didn't have a strong finish to the season either. So you're handing out an 8-year contract on 2/3, 3/4 of a great season. That's a hell of a gamble to take. That being said, if it hits, you get a number one defenseman at under $9 million, you're doing phenomenal. So it's a smart bet for Minnesota. They've been stuck in mediocrity forever. They need to take a couple of these risks and for them to hit to get out of that situation. I mean, Seider and Faber played very similar roles this year. Seider's clearly the better player, and he's got 3 years under his belt proving it. So there is no reality where Seider's getting less than what Faber just got.
Yeah, to me, it just reaffirmed the whole process. Like, it wasn't there's maybe some debate as to whether it was an overpay or whether it was risky, but I don't think Seider was going to come in very low, like, $8 million or something in the sevens. I think that would have been ludicrous, especially with what he's done and with how the cap's going up. To me, it just kind of reaffirmed the range that Seider's going to be signing in if he signs an 8-year deal. It wasn't an especially big needle mover for me. It just kind of closed maybe the most wild or fantastical opportunities you might have thought the Red Wings would have had to lock Seider up long term. And that's on an 8-year deal. 7 even changes that number. 6 changes that number. So it's not guaranteed, but yeah, it was interesting, but not a massive needle mover in the whole conversation.
Sort of made the approximation on the contract a little bit more accurate. It definitely was another data point that sort of reaffirmed where I think we all sort of thought Mo Seider would come in around ish. And I think Brock Faber actually broke his ribs or had broken ribs for like the final 20 games of the season, which is commendable that he could play on that because I don't even know if I could get out of bed. And I'm an elite athlete.
You can't even get out of bed like with normal ribs.
Normally, yeah. So Yeah, I think for Seider, it's just another data point. I think it really sort of reaffirms where everyone kind of figured the number may or may not be around. But I don't think it really changes anything in their opinion on the negotiation.
Everything that's kind of coming in where you might be able to link it to Seider and Raymond, like nothing has been outrageous in my mind. Like Faber obviously doesn't directly translate to Raymond, but whatever kind of analogs you want to find, you're looking at that number of low eights to mid nines, depending on how much of a bargain they're driving and how much of a calculation they're doing for buying UFA years and buying up, 8 years when they think that they're going to get better. And there's a different amount of, UFA years between these players. Not every situation's specifically the same, but you can find those kind of connections. Yeah, anywhere from 8.25 optimistically to mid nines to me seems like the number.
For Seider, well, Faber's the floor now. That's the floor of what Seider's going to get. And then you go up from there.
And they may not even be stuck on number or term. It may be, in the weeds with like no move clause. What year would that kick in? Does one even happen in this contract? What
they can't have one when they're
bonuses
an RFA.
like? Yeah, exactly. So it could always be stuff like that too. But given how Yzerman operates, we'll never know.
Yeah, how much signing bonus structure is, and they always align that with lockout years to make it. Yeah, it's a whole thing. You really wonder, like this is a very unique point in the NHL cap era because for a fact that there's going to be big jumps in revenue, and barring another, league shutting down event, the league should generate more revenue and the projected jumps should increase even further. And so these young, talented guys who have an opportunity to cash in twice, they want the Toronto model. They want the Matthews-Marner model. And yeah, maybe Matthews is a bit far to reach, but if you're Lucas Raymond, you're saying, Marner got it, why can't I? Why can't I do the exact same thing in terms of cashing in twice? You hope that's not what they're doing because that's tough for the team. Very obviously, you look at the situation the Leafs are in. But yeah, the contracts that have been signed, boring though it may be, everything is kind of as expected so far. All right, let's jump into some NHL news, which actually includes other signings. Let's start with the big one, which is Martin Necas with the Carolina Hurricanes, who very publicly, he wants to be traded. He doesn't see a future with the Carolina Hurricanes. The Hurricanes were shopping him, and they were asking quite a bit. They were kind of trying to walk that line of, we see a lot in this guy, and we're not going to dish him out for nothing, but also he hasn't, taken hold of our top roster spots that he's looking for. So as a fan of a team that wants to acquire Marty Necas, I will have the biased view of, well, you can't sit in both lanes, but you actually can. As the Carolina Hurricanes, they had team control, and they actually signed him to a 2-year contract, $6.5 million per year. And it's kind of the, maybe optimistically for the Hurricanes, the best of both worlds, because Necas gets a contract that walks him right to unrestricted free agency. He gets money, like $6.5 million, nothing to scoff at. They're paying him for his potential to some degree. He gets an opportunity to prove himself for his next deal. And the Hurricanes, if he does prove himself, they can find that time to mend the relationship, or they can trade him. So to me, this deal kind of makes a lot of sense, if not a bit of a surprising end to this part of the saga.
Carolina has all the options open to them. This makes them more tradable if they want to do it this year, because teams have a bit more sense of certainty. Might lower the trade value a touch because you're getting a year and a half hypothetically versus 5, 6, 7, 8 years. But sign-in trades are always an option, even though he's a year away from the extension. Teams would talk about that ahead of time. He had kind of a down year, so from his perspective, if he goes out and lights it up the first half of the season, makes him look more appealing to other teams, makes the trade more likely. Carolina's happy because they fancy themselves contenders for the next 2 years, and they probably are. So probably not a bad thing to have a good player on your roster for 2 years at $6.5 million. So he could be an own rental for a couple seasons. Yeah, it's as flexible of a contract as you could have possibly had for all parties involved. It's just his on-ice play now is going to dictate what happens next.
Boring, though, because I wanted to see him moved. I actually, again, a lot of people would have loved to have had him on the team, and I think he would have been a good fit in Detroit. But the door's not closed, and that is now, in a couple of years, if he's not moved somewhere else or re-signed, that's going to be an interesting conversation about a player who potentially is a high-end forward who is going to have like the maximum amount of term that you can get him at in terms of being in his prime and getting a lot of really good years out of him as a UFA. So could demand a high price and could be an interesting get for other teams.
Unless his play falls off an absolute cliff, I would imagine teams will trip and fall over themselves to try and sign him. And we might even see, like, if Carolina has an offseason next year, there might be teams willing to trade for Marty Necas to get him as a rental and to start the negotiation before everybody else.
Totally. It's a formula in the NHL where that's actually beneficial. You get a guy in your system, you get him in the program, you show him some success, you show him, how well his family can fit into the city, that kind of thing. It's worked before. Not every time, but it could definitely work.
If the cost is cheap, it's worth the gamble.
Which might be, might not be.
It all depends on how he plays.
UFAs and high-end forwards, notoriously cheap to trade for or sign.
Yes.
In the NHL. Elsewhere in the NHL, maybe talking about previous conversations of comparables, but Kaiden Guhle signed a pretty big contract extension with the Montreal Canadiens, a 6-year contract extension worth $5.55 million per year, $33.3 million contract total. That's Montreal's MO at this point. Basically try to sign the guys that you believe in as long-term as possible without, breaking the bank.
Yeah, this is almost what you have to do in the modern NHL to be successful as a rebuilding team. You draft your guys, you develop them at the early stages of, hey, this might be a guy, get them locked up long-term before they get any more expensive. Like Slavkovsky's deal could go off the rails, could be an absolute bargain. Guhle could go off the rails, could be an absolute bargain. Obviously, these are educated guesses, so they're betting on the latter in both. And if they hit on both, now all of a sudden you have a whole hell of a lot of value in your roster and a lot of extra cap space to acquire more good players. So again, it's a gamble, but for teams in that position, it's the exact type of gambles they should be making.
They have to save all that money for Demidov.
But actually, though,
I wasn't kidding.
Yeah.
I was not joking, unfortunately.
Good problem to have. Speaking of Necas, I actually glossed over this, but in terms of trades, I believe it was Frank Saravalli reported that the Sabres allegedly had a trade in place for Necas, but he wouldn't sign there. And the Jets actually offered some combination of Rutger McGroarty, Cole Perfetti, and a pick for Necas, but the deal was never done for one reason or another. And that might be because they were asking for something else from Carolina, or maybe he wouldn't sign there. Still, that was...
Call me pessimistic, but if he ain't signing in Buffalo, he definitely isn't signing in Winnipeg.
So I want to go somewhere better than Buffalo. It's like, well, we've got Buffalo North.
They don't even have an airport. Yeah, I have to be careful because that's like a very online meme, and people often will just send like the Wikipedia article, and it's like, it's just as stupid.
Well,
everyone's too online.
I got a friend in Winnipeg who loves living in Winnipeg, and the joke he would always say to me is, well, in the winter it gets stupid cold, and in the summer the mosquitoes will get you. And then he just stops talking.
That's a joke? That's a terrible joke. That's a very sad joke. I feel sad for your friend.
Well, the truth in it is what makes it funny. Because you expect to have that but coming at the end of it, and it never happens.
That's a tough look. Okay, it is so off-season on this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast. We're not going to borrow content from future episodes. Let's jump into Overtime. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to continue to make the show happen, the bonus overtime episodes, the bonus off-season episodes, the Discord, the giveaways, all of that and lots more, you allow us to run Winged Wheel podcast nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. Stay tuned. And those are in benefit of the Jamie Daniels Foundation. You allow us to produce other fantastic content like Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashant Iyer and Sean Shapiro. Speaking of Carolina, they interviewed active NHL GM Eric Tulsky on a recent episode. Go give them a follow and listen to that episode. It's a fantastic interview with GM Eric Tulsky. You also allow us to continue to produce this show and make it bigger and better. We barely missed our milestone. We still technically missed it, but we didn't wait too long before catching it, I think. But we crossed the 5 million lifetime downloads mark and another 1.5 million views on YouTube, which is just we're blown away. And also throughout the offseason, you guys keep pushing us up to number 2 behind Chicklets on the hockey podcast chart, like overall, not even team specific. So that doesn't happen without our Patreon supporters. Thank you all so much. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Let's jump into some questions from our patrons. Himmy Howard, always love that name, says, do you think all 4 of Talbot, Husso, Lyon, and Campbell will be both in the Wings organization and healthy, looking at Husso here, on opening night?
Yes.
I vote yes as well.
I'm going to say no, not because someone is moved, but because until Husso is healthy, I won't believe he's healthy.
I was going to say, because he's the only one of the 3 that has had notorious injury problems, but I've heard all the prognoses were good for start of the season. So unless he has another setback, it's trending towards all 4 of them will be healthy.
No Justice, No Petry says, I have a statement and a question for you boys today. First, I'm sadly not Evan's stalker. I live in Twister's territory, USA, and just happen to enjoy the same niche music your billionaire co-host does. Interesting.
That way to throw off your trail.
Yeah. Now the question, why do we bring in vets, making it almost impossible for a youth to make it in? Does ownership force Stevie's hand? I prefer seeing Mazur over someone like Mott. Maybe I'm just cynical, but our conference is far too tough for the playoffs this year, so why not let the kids grow at the highest level?
I will say 2 things to give both a positive and a negative spin on this. 1, this is standard NHL operating procedure. There are, outside of actively being in the depths of a rebuild, there is no NHL team that will just gift rookies roster spots. But I wish they would, because I'm in the same boat. The Red Wings, until you are I'll call it greater than 50% playoff team, the development is still the important part. Now, that being said, if you sign all these veterans and 1 or 2 of these rookies come into camp in preseason and blow the doors off, and you are actually willing to waive or send down a vet to give these kids a spot, then there is literally no harm in it. This is the better way to do it, because then your ass is covered no matter what way it goes in camp and preseason. The Red Wings haven't had many guys do that. They did make room for Seider and Raymond, but again, that was actively in a rebuild. They didn't for Edvinsson last year. Different positions, I know, but still. So I'm skeptical that if Mazur comes in and kills it in camp, that they actually will scratch or waive a Mott or somebody. But until it actually happens, we can't say for sure.
The Edvinsson, this is almost hypocritical of me to say because I keep beating the drum of Edvinsson stayed down too long, but I actually don't fully agree that Detroit is back to their old ways of over-ripening prospects. I think the Ken Holland era over-ripening prospects, like you think about, Gustav Nyquist or whatever, they had a team that was stable enough to bring those guys in, and you could have sheltered them in such a way where they could have come up much sooner, and they sat down too long, and the team got there's a whole myriad of issues with that era of the Red Wings. But still, this isn't that to me. I think you're right, Brad. This is standard operating procedure for the NHL at large. Detroit doesn't always come on this side of the line, but how do you look at Seider and Raymond and a few other fringe cases to a smaller degree and not think that they have actually been a bit more progressive in this space? And it was to their benefit, and their hand was forced because who else was going to play defense and who else was going to play wing between Seider and Raymond. But I'm not so scared by it.
We've really only had 3 examples in this regime of this is a rookie that wasn't projected to make the lineup this year, that definitely deserved to make the lineup after preseason and training camp, and so far they're 2 for 3. Edvinsson was the one who definitely should have been on an NHL roster that wasn't. Seider and Raymond, they did give spots to. Again, the organization was in 2 very different spots. Danielson, you could kind of sort of make an argument for, earned his way on the team last year based on his performance, but given his age and situation, it was understandable they did what they did. I'll just reiterate, we had like a 45-minute conversation on this on a previous episode, but I'll just reiterate it. If one of Mazur, Danielson, or Kasper comes into camp and absolutely earns it and they send him down, that's a big problem organizationally, because again, this is will be our confirmation of how we might think this organization operates.
Yeah,
but I will also say, if those 3 come into camp and none of them kick the door down for a spot this year, that's a bigger problem.
It's a different kind of problem. None of them permanent, but you got to hope things turn around.
We've talked about how you have to stagger the rookies so you're not throwing them all in at once. And if one of those 3 does not spend a majority of the season with the Red Wings, it's a bigger problem than over-ripening the rookies.
I'll give it a third to a half of the season. I'm fine with that range.
50-ish games, I'll say.
Clint Benesh says, hockey question, all things being equal, what do you think is the most valuable position on the ice?
Goalie.
It's goalie. That's the boring answer. Because a goalie can steal a game for you or nuke a game for you.
Yeah.
It's the only position that can do that.
So removing goalies, say the 5 skaters.
It's center, and it's
right
not
D,
close.
of course, yeah.
It's center, and there's no argument for anybody else.
You were on the right side as well, playing.
Yep.
Yeah. So Evan and I outvote you here.
Yeah, but center is responsible.
I also didn't vote, so.
It is actually center.
Yeah, the quick answer of it is center has a ton of responsibilities in the D zone. Center is generally a primary role in the transition, and center is usually a primary role in the offensive zone. So they really do impact the ice in all ways.
Okay, one more here from Don't Tase Me, Bro. Old school throwback online hockey name there. It says, with the common discussion around playoff seeding and structure, I keep coming back to the thought of reorganizing the divisions a tad, regardless of time zones, obviously important. A division with the Red Wings, Nashville, Columbus, Chicago, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, and Toronto seems to make the most sense. Thoughts on this restructure and likewise other divisions?
I would bet everything I own the NHL will never pull the Leafs away from the Bruins and Canadiens.
You have to, at the NHL, it's easy to look at a map and just draw the tightest clusters you can. But regardless of time zones, the NHL will stretch geography to make money work. And honestly, it kind of I kind of agree with it. I might not have when I was younger, but growing up now, I think you got to keep those rivalries there. I do hate forcing them to play each other in the playoffs. I still don't like that, but you gotta keep the rivalries in division.
To me, I actually think they nailed the divisions in how they structure them. You could maybe nitpick, toss Tampa in the Metro, Columbus into the Atlantic, but you don't want to separate the Florida teams. This is kind of the best case scenario. Of all the 4 major sports, the NHL actually has the best division alignment. They are the closest to accurate because I've seen a lot of proposals to the MLB and the NFL for divisional restructure because those are 2 leagues that desperately need it.
The MLB's a mess. I can't make left to right.
It's awful. The NHL is probably as close to perfect as any of the major leagues can get.
Where I will still beat my drum, and I get so much flack for this, and I'm sure people make a lot of great points, and I know I'm being somewhat irrational. It's just once you get to the playoffs, I can't stand the rigid
1 to
brackets.
8. 100%. 1 to 8.
I love reseeding. It's not even about 1 versus 8, and you get. I know it just often generates a lot of the same matchups. It's the reseeding. Always reseed, highest versus lowest. That's the biggest thing for me. But yeah, in terms of divisions, we'll see how expansion changes things. Like if the league gets to 34, or as I predict, 36 teams by 2035, where those go are going to be interesting because some team is going to have to play outside of their time zone.
Why Houston goes into the Central, Quebec goes into the Atlantic.
Oh, we're doing Quebec. That's great.
Well, if you're going to 4.
No, it's going to be
Hamilton plays in the Atlantic.
No, Hamilton in the Metro just to appease the Leafs.
Well, Hamilton will take Toronto's spot because once they come in, then the Leafs have an excuse to fold and they just will absorb all their fans. I don't know why I'm taking digs at the Steve Dangle podcast right now.
Well, actually, Atlanta, Quebec, Houston, and who would be the West team they would add then, would you think?
Wyoming.
Stop.
The Evansville Earthquakes.
Oh, that's a great name. Their arena is going to be rocking, and by rocking I mean
off the Richter scale, the Mike Richter scale.
We went with Evansville when the Jackson holes were right there.
No, he went for the deeper
Jackson
cut.
5 holes.
Oh
that works on 2 ways.
We're ending this podcast right there. Thank you so much for listening to the Winged Wheel podcast, folks. Thank you to our sponsors of this episode, to all of our patrons. We can't thank you enough. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. I promise you we never finish on a joke that funny. If you're a listener of old, I'm sorry that we just peaked in funniness right there. That's Evan for you. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. It really does make a difference for us. And if you want to support the show, but Patreon's not for you, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. leave us a rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, give the thumbs up, and to tell a friend about the show. It really does help. To all of our Patreon supporters, genuinely, this does not happen without you. Our name level supporters on Patreon: Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Garon Foundation, Akefer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Cronner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Brant Crypto, Carl Britanninowski, Carl Provi, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood, Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Jim Kalmbach, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pud, Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Scree and Lube, That's What I Appreciates About You, The Iser Type, Tiger McDougall, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iser Plan Stan, General Andy Bohannon of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Axel Sandine Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Chimkim Nutgets, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarp Lagoon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheeseback Space Force, Connor Layton and Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes Dangleberries, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, Ian, Jackson Hole, Wyoming Truther, Jacob Zwaniga, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, J.M. Rhapsody, Joe and Reese's Pickle and Boot Shop, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans, Derogatory, John Engels, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Brad is Wrong, and Plays Like Sprong, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Linda Hall, Michigan Boy and Avs Country, Ophelia, Reed, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings Fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll be back with you midweek if you're a Patreon supporter. We'll be back with you next week for everyone else, unless Steve Yzerman changes everything. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.